All right. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. This webinar series has been convened by the Critical Zone Network, CZN, Early Career Network, in partnership with the Critical Zone Collaborative Network. This is the second series of a number of series that the CZN Early Career Network has planned, all with the goal of enhancing collaboration and synthesis across CZ Observatory and Watershed sites. Welcome to the first week of this quasi-cyberseminar series, Tools for Integrating and Synthesizing Data from CZOs and Watershed Sites. This is a 6-part series that will continue each week at this time until December 2nd with a brief break for Thanksgiving. My name is Julia Masterman. I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for CUAHSI. CUAHSI is a consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic science, and our mission is to advance water science by strengthening interdisciplinary collaboration, providing critical infrastructure through our data services, and promoting education in water science at all levels through programs like this Cyberseminar series. CUAHSI also serves as the national coordinating hub for the Critical Zone Collaborative Network, or CZCN, and we're thankful to the members of the CZN network team for their contributions to this series. I'd encourage you to reach out to me, visit our website, sign up for our newsletter, or join our community Slack channel to learn more about CUAHSI or to get involved. I'll add information on all of those things in the chat in just a moment. A few logistics. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the CUAHSI YouTube channel later this afternoon. If you're interested in viewing some of the webinars from the previous series about introductions to CZO and watershed sites, those are also posted on the CUAHSI YouTube channel. Secondly, we ask that you use the Q&A functionality to submit questions to our speakers today rather than the chat. You can take a moment to find where that is with your Zoom controls now. And finally, we expect that all involved with quasi-cyberseminars promote and maintain a professional, considerate, and respectful collaborative virtual environment. So thank you for being a part of that. Thank you again for joining us, and to the CZN Early Career Network for putting together another great and fantastic lineup of presentations. And thank you to our presenters for taking the time to join us today. Today's session is about cyber infrastructure tools and interoperable models. And with that, I'll pass the mic to CZN Early Career Network Steering Committee member and research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Bhavna Arora.
Thanks, Julia. Can I share my screen? Perfect. Do you see the slides okay? Perfect. Okay. So yeah, welcome everybody. This is series 2 from this combination of the Critical Zone Collaborative Network and the Early Career Cohort team. And we are going to be talking about tools for integrating and synthesizing data from critical zone observatories and watershed sites. So again, a fantastic lineup for this particular webinar series, as you can see on the slide here. So what are we trying to do here? The goal for this series is really to learn about transferable tools, models, and workflows that can help guide the directions and content of an upcoming AGU workshop. The AGU workshop is titled Towards an International Critical Zone Network of Networks for the Next Generation Through Shared Science, Tools, Data, and Philosophy. That workshop is going to happen just prior to the AGU Fall meeting on 9 December, and it's a completely virtual format. In the workshop itself, we are trying to facilitate cross-site and cross-network knowledge. We are also trying to identify a subset of prioritized grand challenge questions where the early career team would work together in synthesizing and doing more data discovery, hypothesis generation, and using simple and flexible models across these sites. So really, we want to use that workshop as a platform to help facilitate coordinated and transdisciplinary investigations of the critical zone, and also stay connected even beyond that workshop. And the purpose of our early career group in organizing all of the webinars and the workshop itself is to advance modes of collaboration across these critical zone networks, providing a foundation to do together what would be impossible to do alone. So again, the purpose isn't to create new infrastructure. We already have incredible existing infrastructure, which provides us a springboard for new modes of collaboration. So where we want to end up is, having those transferable and interoperable tools and models and approaches to be able to ask, questions that go beyond an individual site and an individual network. So to quickly summarize what the timeline of our activities is, as Julia mentioned, we had a previous fall quasi cyber seminar series, again, done in coordination with the CZCN and the early career cohort team, where we came together to look at science questions that were, important for individual landscape characteristics and for different observatories. And then this particular series, we're looking at tools that are going to facilitate us to do some of that synthesis. And at the AGU, we definitely have that workshop where we want to bring together the early careers to be working and do some actionable science. So use those tools, have those questions handy, and foster some more collaborations and work across these networks and sites. And this wouldn't have been possible without the senior advisory board for this team, including Jerad and Beth from CUAHSI, who's here with us today, and without my early career cohort team. So a shout out to them as well. With that, I want to welcome and thank our panelists for today. And I will pass this on to Jannis to talk to introduce our panelists here. Jannis?
Thanks, Bhavna. So I'm delighted that you're all here today, and I'm very pleased that we will hear 5 excellent presentations today that will give us insights into the portfolio of innovative tools to promote the cross-site synthesis between critical zone communities and networks. In preparation for the talks today, we asked the speakers to consider 3 questions. Those questions are which tools, models, or workflows exist within your group that are easy to use and readily transferable to other critical zones, sites, or data sets? What are the main challenges for the cross-site investigations and transferability to this tool? So in terms of data quality, data harmonization, accessibility, and are there lessons learned in your development of repositories to the use of this that can set up future benchmarks? So with that, I don't want to spend more time, and I hand over to our first speaker, Professor Laura Toran from the Temple University. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with a tool that is kind of a overarching tool, a tool of tools, so to speak. And I worked on this summary with Lindsay Amon-Cramo, who's a graduate student at West Virginia University, Matt Covington, who's a professor at University of Arkansas, and then myself. Matt is a Python programmer. Lindsay is a new Python programmer, and I use Python programs, but I don't actually program in Python. Just to kind of give you a sense of how different people can use these tools, people at different experience levels. And we pulled the tools together for an NSF-funded project. It's a research coordination network to try to develop a critical zone in carbonate rocks. So NSF provided the funding for our efforts. So the Python programming language, which you're going to hear several examples of people say, I have a Python script for this. It's widely used in science because it's free, open source. Those aspects give you some collaboration. Really want to highlight thousands and thousands of libraries. People have done a lot of the coding that you may need. And it encourages transparency of methods. I didn't realize I wouldn't be able to see the audience here, but I was going to do a quick check on how many people actually write in Python. I don't know if we could do show of hands or if that just isn't going to show up in the panel mode. Do you guys, Julia, do you know if that's something we can see?
If you guys want to put in the chat.
Yeah, just a yes or no.
Yeah,
I was going to use
no.
the reaction button just to get a feeling for how many people use Python. And a lot of people, a lot of yeses sometimes. So in the interest of speed, how many people are actually writing Python scripts? Does that change your answer? And then this is not going to work too well to use chat. I can't do a count, but then have you tried to share a script, a Python script with someone? And that's the one I really want to focus on in this talk. So why would we use Python? We use Python because of all these libraries that other people have written that we can then bring to bear on our data. So this is a example data set from Pennypack Creek in one of my study areas. And I was looking at conductivity over time. I plotted 2010 and 2017 here. And I want to sort out whether these years look different. But there's a lot of peaks and troughs. So I might want to find out how many storms occurred in these each year. And I have a Python script that will count those storms. There's seasonal trends in conductivity. Maybe I want that in there, maybe I don't, but there's Python scripts that can remove that trend for me. If I actually want to take an average, you can't average storm and non-storm data. It depends on how many storms you have. That's just not going to work, but there are smoothing routines in Python. Now I put this graph in what you should recognize as Excel, the traditional orange and blue default colors. Python has wonderful plotting libraries as well. Can you do this in Excel where you have each data point is a different color? We use this plot to show how nitrate and specific conductivity don't behave the same way over the course of a day. There's hysteresis, they don't fall on a single line. And we showed both time of day and the concentrations on a single plot. Great Python tools. What happens though is that we want to encourage collaboration. That's one of the themes of this workshop. And our tool is actually called a collaboratory. It's a Google app that requires no download. So you no longer have to download Python onto your computer or onto the computer of someone you want to share with. So that's pretty powerful. You take a traditional Jupyter Python notebook and you put it on Colab, and with some very minor modification, you're running. And it's free, just like Python is free. This ability to share really can make a big difference in how we interact with other people. You know, for someone like me, if my student writes a script and I don't like what they did, I can modify it very easily. And that's really important in collaboration, right? The scripts look like traditional Python scripts. And if you aren't familiar with Python, lots of commenting is encouraged. You've got one color for the comments, one for the code, easily seen. This is a script that pulls data from USGS databases. You know, our example is right near my house in Fort Washington. But the way we've commented this, you can substitute your own USGS station very readily and then run through your script. And a lot of times what we do is try to put these scripts in stages so you run them one at a time and debugging becomes a little bit more easy. Where are you going to find useful notebooks? So two big sources are HydroShare, which you're going to hear more about in the next talk, and GitHub. Both of these are large repositories, especially GitHub. You can get lost very quickly looking for things there, you know, if you know the exact right search terms. And what our project is doing is trying to provide an entry for people that haven't used Python and hydrology as much and get them started. So we've created on our website, the Carbonate Critical Zone website, we've created one-page summaries on these topics, some really common libraries, some tools that are used in groundwater modeling, some other hydrology tools, more surface water oriented, and then data processing tools, just one page on each of these topics. So, you know, our goal was kind of to create some bite-sized chunks to get people interested. And then the second thing that we're doing on this website is we're putting some what we call example collabs. So that one that I just showed you, we work through a tutorial that shows you how to change to your USGS site and extract the data that you want. And we're working on one that does some time series analysis on USGS data. So right now we've got a couple of our tutorials finished, and our next stage is to work on some really short videos to introduce people to Colab specifically. Colab is free. Most universities I've talked to have it as one of their apps, or you can ask your tech support team to download it, and that will get you in business right away. So that's my introduction to Colab, really good collaboratory tool if you're using Python scripts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. So next will be Jerad Bales, which is the Executive Director at CUAHSI. Jerad, please go on.
So thank you, and thanks, Laura, for the shout out for HydroShare. I'm going to talk about a little bit more than just HydroShare here, but yeah, the bulk of what I'm talking about is HydroShare. So CUAHSI has a number of different tools for discovering and accessing and publishing data, and also tools that allow one to run scripts in HydroShare. And so you can put a script, build a Python script, put it in a Jupyter notebook, access data in HydroShare, publish the results back to HydroShare. So we're going to talk about these in just a little bit more detail. So one of our tools is HydroClient. And so that was the first tool that CUAHSI developed maybe 10 or 12 years ago. It hosts a metadata catalog of many different time series, for many different time series. 5 million time series are hosted, or metadata for 5 million time series are hosted in the HydroClient at more than 1 million and almost 1.5 million locations around the world. So the user searches the catalog, finds what they are looking for, and then accesses the data. And so the data are not stored on HydroClient necessarily, but in other data services that are accessed once you request that. A user can add their own metadata to the catalog and upload and publish their own data and get a DOI. We're currently have a contract with a vendor to modernize the HIS with especially increased capabilities for accessing data from sensors and managing data from sensors in real time. HydroShare is a tool that most of you are probably familiar with, or many of you are. It's a tool, and all these tools, by the way, are free, open source to anyone. But HydroShare is a tool that allows one to upload their data to HydroShare, describe the data with metadata, share the data with colleagues, and also to set sharing rights. So you can share with 3 of your best friends, or 10 of your best friends, or with the world. And you can also publish data in HydroShare and get a DOI. So the nice thing about HydroShare is that it essentially allows you to manage the full data lifecycle. So you can upload raw data, you can work on the data in HydroShare, you can share the data, you can share workflows in HydroShare, publish it, and satisfy the FAIR data requirements. And so this is an example of a search in HydroShare for soil moisture data, shown with the red box there at the top. That's your search term. And so then up pops the various soil moisture data sets that were discovered in HydroShare, and then hovering over these data sets, then you can get a little bit more information, and then you can access the data sets. If you see the green unlocked padlock over there to the left, that means that the data are accessible to you and everyone and available for download, which is what the blue box means. So in addition to just individual data sets, we also in HydroShare have communities and groups. And so an example of a group would be the CZO Boulder site. And so data from CZO Boulder are in this group, and I have a group administrator, but everything in this group is from the Boulder CZO. A community would then be, for example, all of the CZO sites. And so, you know, that would be the CZO national community shown here. So one could go to this and send it in the collaborate button in HydroShare. And then one would go to this community and then find CZO data. We're also building data or groups, or we have built groups for the new CZNet thematic clusters. And so here's just an example of 3 of those: the bedrock cluster, the coastal cluster, the geomicrobiology cluster, and then we'll be hosting a community for this 9 thematic clusters in the CZNet program. Right now, there's no data there, or very little data, because users have not uploaded their data, as we're just in the 2nd year of this program. So we also have stood up the new CZNet critical zone website shown here, accessed at criticalzone.org. We're using the same URL that the old CZO program used. If you scroll down on this homepage, you'll have access to the archived CZO websites. So that website was frozen when we stood this one up. But the other thing to remember about, or to know about, particularly for this group, is the CZNet hub, which is what CUAHSI hosts. We are offering opportunities to propose synthesis activities. And so if you look on our website, or if you look on the John Wesley Powell Synthesis Center website, you will see a call for proposals for synthesis activities. And in that those synthesis activities, one can propose a synthesis topic. We will fund trips to the John Wesley Powell Center for the synthesis team to work together, and fund a postdoc for 2 years. So please take a look at that. Currently, we are building a new portal in which we are linking multiple repositories through a single portal, including HydroShare, CZAR, Zenodo, EarthChem. And so this, you know, I think is one lesson learned, is that we don't need new portals. We don't need new repositories. We need to use the ones that we have and just make greater access, or greater use of those, and provide improved access. And so the last slide is just to show that we do have computing capabilities within HydroShare. We have a Python gallery, as Laura mentioned, also MATLAB gallery and R gallery. So through HydroShare, one can actually use MATLAB for free without a license. So thank you for the opportunity, and I really hope to hear from some of you soon, and I hope that you will make use of our resources. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerad. That was very nice, your presentation, and also that that you include different open source softwares to access this. So our next speaker will be Tao Wen from the Syracuse University. Tao, please go on.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and also thank you, Jerad and Laura, for setting up the stage for my presentation. So today, I would like to take a moment to introduce some tools that I have been using in my own research, in my hydrogeochemistry and watershed science research. I want to introduce those tools with respect to data management and data synthesizing. And the list of tools is not supposed to be exhaustive, but I think some of these tools might also be helpful to attendees in today's webinars, particularly for critical zone science researchers. So I'm organizing my talk just based on the research data lifecycle. As you can see, the data is moving from the data creation, processing, and analysis, and then eventually it goes to data reuse. So in today's talk, I want to highlight R in RStudio and also an open source GIS software that I have been using in my own research. And then I will mention a few, data repository, data Cyberinfrastructure, including any university library and the data infrastructure created and organized by CUAHSI, HydroShare, and HydroClient. I will also mention GitHub and Zenodo. But attribution, of those tools to different stage of the data lifecycle is not mutually exclusive. And the application of those tools I introduced here will be much broader, as the other two speakers mentioned. I mean, for example, HydroShare can also be used for other stage of the data life cycles. So here I'm mainly focused on my personal experience with those tools and how I have been using them. And then I will introduce some research efforts from my group and my collaborators. For example, I will introduce a fossil fuel energy related data database that is shell network database. And I also introduce two data analysis tools, GeoNet and SWGT, which stands for Sliding Window Geospatial Tool. And then I will wrap up my presentation with a quick intro to the HydroLearn module, which everyone can use for free to educate yourself or students or anyone who wants to learn data science for geoscience research. I'm going to start this presentation with the tools that you can use and I have been using for data management and data sharing. So the first part is about, I always digitize my data and publish my data online whenever possible, whenever ready. So here's the poll question. So feel free to type in the chat to respond to these two questions. Do you currently deposit your data in online data repository? If yes, what is the name of the data repository you often use? Great. I see positive responses, yes, and I see people typing HydroShare. Yeah, I do also see GitHub. Yes, it's Dive. Cool. That's great. So that means a lot of you guys are already starting using data repository to share data. This is great. And my personal experience, I have been sharing and publishing water quality data and water quantity data related to fossil fuel industry to a theme-specific database that is shell network database. I also publish and share my other types of research data to other repositories, for example, CUAHSI HydroShare. In addition to that, I also publish those thematic or paper-specific data sets to university libraries for the long-term data preservation. So when I share and publish data online, before sharing the data set with others, I always get a DOI to the data. You can get a DOI either through your university library or CUAHSI HydroShare. And there are also many other channels through which you can get a DOI. Then what about my computer codes? So for computer codes, I normally host the source code on GitHub as a repository, and then I always get a DOI while Zenodo for each release my algorithm. So here I'm showing a screenshot, the sliding windows geospatial tool. That is the screenshot on the GitHub. So basically this tool help us to do the geospatial analysis and by considering the geospatial context. I want to wrap up this portion of the presentation with a recently published paper. So basically, we gathered together tens of U.S. geoscientists and data scientists last year, right before the COVID pandemic, and we published a paper. In that paper, we shared and summarized some lessons and the needs for the low temperature geochemistry community in terms of the data infrastructure. And so here I include the table, but I think the most important takeaway from that paper is we recommend we should really shift our data informatics paradigm from build data repository, data will come, to publish data online, cyber tools will find. As Jerad pointed out, we probably have enough data repository. We should start putting our data in those repositories. Then why R and R Studio? Laura mentioned Python. I think similar to Python, R and R Studio are also very good open source free tools. We can use them for basically anything related to data analysis and data visualization, and they're free to use. But use those coding tools. For example, set up local development environment tool can be a pain for many. So I recommend you guys explore the cloud computing option. So you can use the HydroShare to run our code as Jerad showed just now. And then for geospatial analysis and watershed delineation, you can use the commercial ArcGIS, but the commercial version usually is a pain, especially when dealing with large data sets. So you can use open source GIS, but set up the open source GIS, set up their development environment, sometimes can also be a pain. So in addition to those two options, you can install this operating system named OSGeo Live. You can install it in the virtual machine. Once you install it, you have everything set up. You can go ahead and use. So here I want to briefly point out a GeoNet tool that our group developed. So this tool is a geospatial analysis tool which can automatically analyze stream network to detect what chemistry change around location of your interest. We released the source code of an early version of that algorithm on GitHub via this link. And right now we're working on code parallelization to improve the efficiency of GeoNet. And we look forward to publishing a faster version of GeoNet in early next year as a R package, so stay tuned. And to deal with all of those problems, related to data infrastructure that require data science education for geoscience students. So here, along with other geoscience researchers from University of Washington, Penn State, and Texas A&M, we developed a learning module hosted on the HydroLearn platform, which is also funded by NSF. And so everyone can use this learning module for your teaching, for your own learning for free. Okay, so this is the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tao. That was a really nice presentation. So we'll go to our next speaker. That would be Sibylle Hassler from the KIT. Sibylle, the floor is yours.
Yes, sharing. Now, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So this presentation is actually more a bit coming from the other side of things. So if the tool that you want to use is not there yet. So this is about the development of a tool. In this case, it's called Bridget, or the Bridget Toolbox. And it stands for Bridging the Scales of Evapotranspiration, so ET. What was the motivation for Bridget? So we were looking at evapotranspiration data, and this is an important ecosystem flux because it amounts to 60% of the terrestrial precipitation. And we were looking at these measurements, and there are so many different measurements coming from different disciplines and happening on different scales. And it's quite tough to get them into a system or have a tool to be able to compare them. So for example, if you look at the little graph, you see that there might be something happening at a tree scale. So this might be sap flow measurements, for example. You can say something about transpiration of a tree, and this is more from a plant physiology perspective. But then if you go to like a stand or a plot scale, then you might be looking at micrometeorology because you might be using an eddy covariance system. So for all these different methods, they happen usually on different scales and also quite often in different research disciplines, which makes comparisons quite tough. So what we wanted to do was, create something that makes these comparisons easier. Also, if you work with these measurements, you usually want to integrate them into some kind of modeling or use them as ground truth for remote sensing. And so what is the challenge in bringing these measurements together is, first of all, you need to be able to understand the differences. So this is, as I said, it's more from a data and development perspective. So you need to know the data and the mechanisms. You need to be aware about what goes into the scaling if you want to move from one scale to the other, and what happens there with the uncertainty of the data if you use some algorithms. So the first step was to get to know the data. So in Bridget, we are using data from Torino, which is a monitoring network in Germany, and also from CUAHSI, which was a research unit. And we have sap flow data and lysimeters and eddy covariance data from different sites. So we wanted to get them all into one tool to be able to compare them. First of all, you really get to know each individual method. So you talk to the experts and then you figure out what goes into each scaling step, for example, that you need. So for sap flow, I've worked a lot with sap flow. The measurement actually happens on a part of the tree stem. And then already when you want to say something about the transpiration of the whole tree, you need additional measurements and you need additional equations. And that already gives you some uncertainty because you probably can't measure everything by yourself. If you then go to like a plot or a tree stand, then you need to know, okay, what are the species that are in there? What's the diameters? You also need more measurements, more equations to go there. So for each of the methods of the different measurement types that you want to have in the tool, you need to be aware about what the scaling functions are and what the uncertainties are that go in there. Then your measurements might have different spatial and temporal representation. So the example here is an eddy covariance tower. So this one, the little blue dot would be the tower, and then you have this orange-red shape, which is actually the footprint. So your signal that you measure at the tower comes from this whole footprint. So you can imagine if you want to compare this with the sap flow point, it's quite a challenge to get this together in one system. Also, this footprint, of course, changes because it's dependent on the wind and the wind direction and wind speed. So when that changes, your footprint will look differently. And then we also wanted to have for our methods that we include in Bridget, we wanted to be able to reproduce the typical analysis that are interesting for each community. So also for the eddy community, for example, it might be interesting to have a climatology of the footprint of that eddy measurement so that you can see what happens during the year and where your signal comes from. For all of these methods, if you want to include data from different disciplines into one system or one tool, you really need to take care of the metadata description. So you talk to the experts and get the metadata right. We organized the Bridget package as a Python package. It's also on GitHub according to the different measurements that we wanted to include. So there are basically different sub packages for sap flow, eddy covariance, and soon lysimeters. And basically we want to include all the necessary pre-processing steps, the corrections, the scaling steps, and also the most common analysis steps that the communities might want. So this is one side, it's a Python package. We also went in a different direction. We wanted to integrate the Bridget package into V4Water. V4Water is a virtual research environment, basically a data portal with some tools, some user management databases behind it. So, but it's only one example of a research environment. As Bridget is supposed to be a standalone Python package as well, you can integrate that into other tools or other portals as well. So, but we were developing this one, so that's why we used this as a test case. And the nice thing in V4Water is that we also have a toolbox, and it's actually meant to be open for user-developed tools. That's why we use this as a test environment, and it also includes an uncertainty framework. So if we want to really track the uncertainties through the scaling steps, we can use the framework here. So yeah, to sum up, more or less, so Bridget, as I said, it's a standalone Python package, so it contains the functions that you need to calculate these from these the estimates for different measurement types. But then it's also the toolbox, meant to be the toolbox in V4Water. It makes it also easier to play around with it a little bit. And to get that done, we need to get the metadata description for the different measurements into V4Water. We need to secure the access to the data. For example, for Torino, for this monitoring network, there's a data portal, so we want to connect to that one. We need the appropriate visualization representation tool. As in the example I showed earlier, we might want to look at a watershed, and then there might be like this eddy footprint that is yeah, here in yellow, and then you might have some set flow measurements, and you want to have that all in one system and see where actually the spatial representation is. And then, of course, you have the interesting part, the pre-processing and the analysis tools, and then the uncertainty framework. So when you do scaling and when you want to compare to remote sensing or put your ET estimates into a model, that you know the uncertainty that your scaling steps did to your data estimate or ET estimate. This is at the moment work in progress. So we are in the process of developing this package. And of course, if you're interested in this type of measurements or how to do it, we welcome feedback and test users always. And yeah, that's my last slide. Thank you. If you have any further questions, you can ask them later or send me an email. Thanks.
Thank you, Sibylle. That's a quite nice presentation also that you touched the topic uncertainty. Our final speaker is David Moulton from the Los Alamos National Laboratory. David, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me and see the slides?
Yes. Great,
thanks. So this is again kind of carrying on from Bridge, a little higher level. Oops, I don't know why that's doing that. Let me see here. Hold on, sorry. This is on some sort of time thing. How do I stop that? Anybody know? Maybe I'll just do it this way. Apologies. So can you see that okay?
We only see, we see other parts of your screen.
Yeah, if I play it, it's gonna go in the timed fashion. So
on the slideshow, it has rehearsed timings or something, but you can probably shut that down and it should work. So on the slideshow there, so home, insert, go to slideshow, and
insert here.
No, keep going to the next tabs. So there's a slideshow tab there.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, and you can.
Oh,
so
that is use timing.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Sorry, this was when you copy from one to another. Let's hope this works. Okay, so this is a little higher level. Again, where a lot of tools have been built, and we're really looking at acknowledging the fact that we need these tools to work together. We continue to need to build out these tools. So this is work across several projects, but the primary project that's focused on this software ecosystem concept is called Ideas Watersheds. And so I'll introduce the software ecosystem kind of as we view it, highlight some of the tools very quickly, and then I'll talk about the points of the three kind of questions we were asked. So this is our view of what we're calling our software ecosystem. And so I know it looks a little complicated. I'll walk through the components. So first across the top, we have what we're referring to as our workflow tools. So these are the things that do the data collection, pre-processing, model setup, post-processing and analysis kind of stuff. These tools are often ad hoc. And as was pointed out by the first speaker, not always really in a position to be shared. So what we're really trying to promote here is developing these not as one-offs, but for the community, meant to be shared and reused, so they can be, think particularly transferable across sites. The models, each of which is shown kind of with a stack of poker chips, are physically motivated or process-based. So they really are fully distributed, mostly in parallel, and built on, fundamental mass balance equations, etc. for our energy balance, involving subsurface and surface processes. One of the things we're trying to promote within these codes is sharing of capability so we can improve reuse. So for example, CrunchFlow and pFlowTran both provide reaction capabilities that can be used through the Alchemia interface to our integrated hydrology codes, such as ATS and ParFlow. So those codes don't have to re-implement those capabilities. Similarly, we're looking to develop interfaces to for chemistry to our Earth system land models, and even have those land models ultimately talk to our integrated hydrology models. One thing to point out is that we've separated the codes into kind of our primary codes, which we're able to kind of manage capability development for and interact directly with the developers of, and those that we're just users of. And the main point is we can't possibly use or develop all the codes we need. We really rely on tools from other organizations and develop user expertise with them. So just as a quick rundown, so what are these codes? They're very data intensive. So integrated hydrology really does need effective workflow tools. Here's an example of Watershed workflow, which is able to collect data from a number of different agencies, pull it together, and distribute it on an unstructured mesh while creating that mesh for codes like the ATS. The ATS is an integrated hydrology model, meaning that it fully resolves processes on the surface, things like energy balance, radiation and snow, surface processes like overland flow, as well as reactive transport and sediment transport, and groundwater, including density dependence of salt concentrations, as you might see an increased area of interest for DOE coastal areas and coastal flooding. In addition, one of the tricky things with this kind of ecosystem is when a project needs a new capability, how does it get added? So things like sediment transport and other parts of agricultural watersheds are now being added by the Compass GLM project. So since it's open source and open development, this is something that's always possible and can be done with community engagement. Here's another example, very similar and one maybe more familiar to people in NSF, funded projects is ParFlow. It's also an integrated hydrology model. And finally, just as a couple of examples of other codes, our system land model involving plant functional types, incomplete carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus cycling, and then distributed hydrology type models or semi-distributed models, which are not fully resolved, like SWOT, may be very useful at larger scales. So this is a really quick overview of our ecosystem and the tools in it. So how does this reflect back on some of the questions or thoughts about how you might engage and how you might use these tools? So when we're designing and maintaining these codes, we've really accepted that there's a higher cost upfront and a long-term commitment. So if you're going to develop tools in this along these lines, this is something you need to think about. But we note it really pays off with every new project. Similarly, software development is really best practices are necessary for sustainability and transferability. And most of these things are also something that we've already committed to and already have good experience with. I've pointed out where the workflow tools are really the one area that we feel needs improvement, as those are brought in sort of as under this umbrella of best practices. Simulation codes and workflow tools are often hard to build and install. So we acknowledge that we always need more support for documentation, tutorials, complete examples, and short courses. And we're really working hard on those. But where we've come a long way is deployment with Docker and pre-installation on community HPC resources. And if you haven't used it, I really highly recommend Docker and Jupyter as a way to explore these tools. And finally, I'd just like to conclude by noting, since these are very flexible, process-based tools, they're very site transferable in nature. The real catch is the data needs are significant, and there are often gaps when moving to a new site. Similarly, at new sites, people who have developed models in the past may feel they can, may notice that they would like to start and bring over the very complex model from the very beginning. But really, it's important to always start simple and add complexity as you develop understanding for each new site. And that's all I had. Thanks very much for your time. And I'll take any questions along with the other panelists.
Thank you, David, for that excellent presentation. And also thanks to all the other speakers that presented today for their nice presentation. So are there any questions in the chat that we could present? Bhavna?
I think there is one in the chat where somebody's asking that they've been working with MATLAB and are more comfortable with that and are hearing about R and Python in recent years. Could you compare those software with each other? Do you recommend to learn R and Python? So maybe something that Tao and others, Laura, could probably answer. You guys were talking about teaching resources and or other thoughts.
Yeah, I will be happy to chime in if I'm allowed. So to that question, I think I think that really depends. I guess depends on your research community, what they are using. Like if a lot of existing code are written in MATLAB and you need to reuse those code, you should absolutely learn, to use MATLAB. And as to your specific question, like whether you should start picking up the skill set about R, Python, I think that will be extremely some helpful skill set to have. Yeah, but if you ask me like a further question, oh, which language I should pick between R and Python, I have been asked that question from my students often, and my response is always whichever language you feel easier to start, it will work. And though, in my opinion, I mean, with R and Python, you can almost do everything with either of those two languages. So either one will be good.
Thanks, Tao.
Anybody else wants to chime in on that?
I would just like to add that MATLAB is a proprietary language. And really, the community is driven towards open source and accessibility and open science. So I would say that while MATLAB is certainly useful, I would really strongly encourage you to develop skills in open languages like Python and R.
Anybody else on that? Or I had another question following up with what David just said. So I saw a lot of the times like FAIR principles being mentioned, and the reusability part is really one of the hardest. I think David, you put together that slide that said workflow tools are one-offs, and we need So how do you encourage people to write more comments, and what is the one mantra for saying to ensure that you follow the FAIR principles, especially the reusability part?
I guess I would start by saying even if you're not thinking of the external users, think of your future self. If I need to reuse this to defend or improve my results at some point in the future, which might be 2 or 3 years from now, can I do it? Can I even understand my own code? And then start to think about taking it a step further to, could someone else use my code?
Other thoughts on that?
I put a few comments in the response to the question, and I wrote down.
Thanks, Jerad. That's helpful. But even for you, I mean, as Jerad, as you're doing the different repositories and you're bringing all of the data together from different critical zone networks, how are you ensuring the FAIR principles and that the underlying metadata and the same variables mean the same things, and there's units, and it's a big game changer?
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's also driven by the user, right? I mean, if the user is not committed, or the data provider is not committed to FAIR principles, then there's nothing that there's very little the repository can do to ensure that, other than to require certain metadata fields in order for users to deposit their data in the repository. So there's a technical challenge, and there's a societal or a cultural challenge here, and the cultural challenge may be bigger than the technical.
And Jannis had a question. Jannis, did you?
Yeah, that's a quite simple question, but I think it's a big issue. Imagine you have one variable measured with different types of sensors and different types of uncertainty. So how can you ensure, if you have using different repositories with different, for the same variable, different sensors, different uncertainty, different data quality? So if I want to make a comparison, how I end up. Anyone on that? question?
Maybe I can comment on that one, as it's like pretty much Bridget. So yeah, I mean, what we try to do is just, you know, at least get people to say something about the uncertainties. You know, often you find data without any measure. Maybe you get the sensors accuracy or something. But if you already processed the data quite a few steps and you basically bought some uncertainty going into your final value with that, you should be able to report on that, so that at a specific scale, you know, okay, now this value has an uncertainty. This is the value and has an uncertainty of this and that. And it might be that at a specific scale for for like septal measurements, or for example, it's not really useful to use them at a whole landscape scale, because it's just, you know, all the steps that go in between have problems, you know, if you don't have the appropriate data to feed these steps with. But then maybe for some other uses, for like dynamics or something, it would still be worthwhile measurements, but you need some kind of documentation of the uncertainty for your measurements at your scale or at your whatever value of interest that you have. Then you can at least deal with it.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I think this was such a fantastic webinar, and I hope, you know, folks can join us for next time. We're going to be asking some of those uncertainty questions to our next speakers who are talking about global experiments in synthesis. So we'll follow up with you all next week. Thank you again for joining.